We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
It has now been 92 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared, and the case only seems to grow more unsettling with time. There has been no proof of life, no confirmed ransom demand from a real abductor, and no body. In a genuine kidnapping, investigators usually expect some kind of proof of life within the first 48 hours. That moment never came here, and after more than 3 months, that silence is impossible to ignore. Nancy vanished from her home on what neighbors said looked like a completely ordinary morning. No one reported screams. No one saw any kind of struggle. There was no witness who spotted a car racing away from the property. One moment, she was home. The next, she was simply gone. Her disappearance was reported quickly, and authorities responded as though they were dealing with an immediate emergency. When investigators got to the house, they found signs that something had happened on the porch. There was blood. There were signs of disruption. But the detail that troubled them most was not what was there. It was what was missing. There was no trail leading away from the scene, no clear direction of travel, no obvious clue showing where anyone had gone. The evidence suggested a beginning, but gave no ending. And then came the detail that changed everything. Former FBI analyst Jim Clemente, a veteran of the Bureau's Behavioral Science Division with years spent profiling violent offenders, reviewed what had been reported from Nancy's property and made a striking public statement. He said Nancy had been coughing blood. That distinction matters enormously. He was not describing blood from a visible wound or a violent blow during an attack. He was pointing to the possibility of a medical crisis happening from within. That single detail reshapes the entire picture. Coughing blood can signal a pulmonary emergency, an internal hemorrhage, or a severe respiratory event. Medical experts who weighed in noted that in someone Nancy's age, hemoptysis could be linked to serious underlying conditions, any one of which would make a kidnapping scenario far more difficult. Transporting someone in that condition without urgent medical attention would be incredibly dangerous, and leaving them untreated for long would likely be fatal. If Nancy was already in acute distress before or during whatever happened, the standard kidnapping theory starts to fall apart. Then there is the ransom story, and that only deepens the mystery. Messages did surface demanding money, including Bitcoin, but every single one turned out to be fraudulent. Anonymous messages sent to TMZ were quickly dismissed by federal authorities as fake. The wording was vague, the sources were unverified, and nothing tied them to anyone with actual knowledge of Nancy's whereabouts. One of the most disturbing twists involved Derek Kalla, who was arrested after allegedly sending fabricated ransom texts of his own. According to investigators, he had no connection to Nancy, no inside information, and no role in her disappearance. He simply saw a headline-making case and tried to profit from a family's nightmare. That means 2 separate scam efforts surfaced during the same period, both pushing crypto demands, and neither linked to anyone who actually knew what happened to Nancy Guthrie. That is where this case takes a truly chilling turn. In documented kidnapping cases, there is virtually no pattern in which every ransom communication turns out to be unrelated to the real offender. If someone abducts a person for money, they usually make that known. That is the entire point. A captor who never demands payment, never provides proof of life, and never reaches out is not behaving like a classic kidnapper at all. So after 92 days, the central question remains brutally simple. Is Nancy Guthrie still alive? It is the question driving every theory, every headline, and every conversation around this case. And the evidence available so far has pushed experts toward 2 very different and equally haunting possibilities. The first is that the scene may have been staged. In forensic terms, staging is not just a dramatic theory tossed around for effect. It is a real classification used when physical evidence appears to have been arranged to support a specific story. In this case, that story would be a violent abduction that may not have happened the way it was presented. A staged scene does not require some elaborate operation. One person with a basic understanding of how investigators interpret evidence could create the impression of chaos in a surprisingly short amount of time. What made analysts look in that direction was not just what they found, but what they did not find. There were no witnesses to any struggle. No confirmed sighting of Nancy after she vanished. Most critically, there was no transfer evidence and no physical path showing someone had been taken from the property. Crime scene experts sometimes refer to that kind of absence as negative space, meaning the evidence that should be there simply is not. The porch appeared to say something happened, but it offered nothing to show where the event went next. The second possibility is just as dark, and perhaps even more devastating. It is the idea that whatever happened escalated so quickly that it became fatal before any ransom demand was ever part of the picture. Under that theory, there was never going to be a negotiation because there was never going to be an exchange. The blood, the reported coughing, and the complete absence of legitimate contact across 3 months all fit a scenario in which Nancy was already gone before anyone had time to craft a plan. Those two theories point in completely different directions. In one version, Nancy could still be alive somewhere, and the kidnapping narrative may have been built to conceal the truth. In the other, the outcome was immediate, and the long search that followed has been shadowed by a story that was over almost before it began. That is exactly what makes the case so maddening. The FBI's public stance has only intensified the speculation. Their silence has not looked like the silence of an agency with no leads. It has looked more like the silence of investigators holding something back on purpose. In a disappearance this prominent, that kind of restraint usually suggests one of two things: either agents are carefully building a case and do not want to alert the person they are watching, or they have reached a conclusion so sensitive they will not say it aloud without airtight proof. What is especially striking is what law enforcement has not done. There has been no major public rollout of surveillance footage, no age-progressed image, no expanded public search map, no suspect sketch, and no detailed vehicle description. The usual tools used to generate tips in an active missing person case have remained largely unused in public view. For many observers, that only adds fuel to the idea that investigators may already believe the real story is far more specific than the one everyone first heard. And yet one key fact keeps the other possibility alive: no body has been found. With modern investigative tools like cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, DNA work, and cell tower analysis, completely erasing a physical trail near someone's home would be extraordinarily difficult. The absence of remains could mean there is nothing there to find, and for some, that leaves a narrow but powerful opening to believe Nancy may still be alive. That is what makes every piece of evidence in this case feel double-edged. The missing proof of life could suggest she was never taken in a traditional kidnapping, or it could mean she did not survive whatever happened in those first moments. The fake ransom messages could point to the absence of a real captor, or simply to someone who never intended to ask for money in the first place. Even the blood on the porch can be read two ways. It may support the theory of a staged scene, or it may reflect a medical or violent crisis that spiraled out of control before any plan had fully formed. One thing seems increasingly clear: the FBI likely knows which of those two paths is closer to the truth. Their silence does not feel like confusion. It feels strategic. Until that strategy reaches its end, the public is left staring at a case that does not fit the mold of a conventional abduction. Something in the official narrative appears off. The real issue is figuring out exactly how. Was the scene constructed from the beginning, with evidence placed to sell a version of events that never truly happened? Or did something unfold so suddenly that the so-called kidnapping was effectively over before it ever began, leaving behind only blood, unanswered questions, and 92 days of agonizing silence? Experts remain divided. Investigators are saying very little. And Nancy Guthrie has not been seen or heard from in more than 3 months. For those who follow disappearances like this closely, there is another case that now feels impossible to ignore: Lynette Hooker, the woman who vanished at sea while her husband looked on, in a mystery with eerily similar evidence. And in that case, the final conclusion was nothing like what anyone expected.